I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Pfizer asked the U.S. government for emergency approval of its vaccine. That means it could start being deployed as soon as December. The U.S. now nearing 200,000 new cases a day. We're going to talk to a biotech firm playing a critical role in the vaccine manufacturing process. Plus, a new wave of restrictions across the country. California now mandating a 10 p.m. curfew. We'll get a sneak peek of tonight's Studio 1.0 with Yelp CEO Jeremy Stoppelman with an update on the health of American small business. And while Tesla CEO Elon Musk is recovering from COVID-19 himself, Tesla shares prove they are the peak of good health. Shares advancing 21% this week. The company now worth $470 billion. Those stories in a moment, but first the markets picture. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle with me now. And Abigail, I know you've got Tesla on your radar, but first, just modest moves in the markets overall today. Walk us through the trade on the back of this positive vaccine news.
So today's trading action was very similar to the other days this week, and that is to say choppy. We started off with very small moves and then into the close, more modest moves, as you were mentioning, declines. And that's pretty similar to what has happened all week. And it's interesting, the vaccine news seems to be getting factored in less and less, because 2 weeks ago when it first came out with Pfizer, we had a huge rally. This past Monday, we had a pretty decent rally. And then today, that really just was not the case for the S&P 500 and the Dow. On the other hand, you did on the week have the NASDAQ and the FANG index eking out a gain. Now, after the close today, Emily, and I don't think that this was weighing on markets too much, but of course, yesterday, there was that small spat between the Fed and Treasury over the returning of funds. Fed Chair Jay Powell did put out a letter saying that the Fed was prepared or is going to return those funds. One of the experts that was on one of our other shows earlier today was saying that those emergency funds that were going to be returned were never even really used anyway. So that's why it didn't really weigh on the markets all that much. As for Tesla, you were just talking about it, and this is the reason that we really have those NASDAQ indexes higher. Take a look at that 20% rally, pretty much holding on the week, a new record high. All of that, of course, having to do with inclusion in the S&P 500. That, of course, doesn't happen until December 21st. That's why the S&P 500 did not benefit from it this week and had that weekly decline, but lots of excitement generated over Tesla. And some experts are telling me, traders, Emily, are telling me that the gains are probably likely to continue into the S&P 500 inclusion, and then after it, you might see some sell the news action.
All right, so the week may have ended mixed for the big stock indices, but it started off with a bang on the vaccine news. And then, of course, you've been following Tesla. Talk to us about how it all carried through.
Well, so that vaccine news, it's pretty interesting. So you were mentioning today Pfizer and their partner BioNTech actually filing for that emergency authorization. On the week, take a look at that. Pfizer barely higher. Again, the priced in, it seems as though the vaccine news is becoming increasingly priced in. On the other hand, Moderna, that stock is up sharply, up 9.2%. And some good news for them, the EU may approve some of these vaccines, and they're saying that they may commit $10 billion to Moderna's vaccine along with the Pfizer-BioNTech one. But interesting, Emily, is the fact that you also have stay-at-home stocks higher on the week, Zoom and Peloton. So this board here may actually capture the tension between the difficult near term, because you have Zoom and Peloton higher as folks are preparing to perhaps stay in. On the other hand, the vaccine hope reality for later next year, helping those stocks higher. And then finally, sticking with healthcare, Amazon, despite the fact that they did announce that online pharmacy, this stock also lower on the week. Sort of interesting given the fact that this is the ultimate stay-at-home stock, so not being bought for that reason. But the real declines had to happen with Walgreens and CVS. The threat most likely not for a while, but nonetheless, investors getting ahead of it, selling those shares pretty strongly this week, Emily.
Absolutely, and the CEOs of some of those pharmacy companies also pushing back about just how big a deal this Amazon move actually is. We will be following it. Abigail Doolittle, thank you so much for breaking that all down. Have a wonderful weekend. Moving on now, continuing on the vaccine race. This week, Bloomberg hosted the New Economy Forum, where leaders from all over the world chimed in on the latest developments and what we can expect going forward.
It's not a silver bullet. What we need surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
You know, the bad news is the next 6 months in the Northern Hemisphere will be very tough. The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
Joining me now, Ginkgo Bioworks co-founder and CEO Jason Kelly. Ginkgo Bioworks is focused on bioengineering aimed at streamlining testing and vaccine distribution. And Jason, I know that you've been working with some of these most prominent, the folks making these most prominent vaccine candidates on their manufacturing process. First of all, what is your reaction to the news out of Pfizer today in terms of when we will actually see this on the market, when just regular people can get a vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, I think you will see these, coming on the market in December and January. It was interesting to hear Stefan from Moderna say, it's not a silver bullet. I think that's very true at a population scale coming up, but it's really exciting. The results from Pfizer and Moderna for a new type of vaccine, which is what these nucleic acid vaccines are. I don't think anyone would have predicted those, 95% efficacy or nearly 95% efficacy. That's the bio nerd in me is very excited about that.
So let's talk about, I know you've been doing work with Moderna, for example, on their vaccine manufacturing process. We just spoke with the co-founder and chair of Moderna earlier this week. They also had some positive news. Talk to us about how that process is going and how you see getting these vaccines to people around the world at scale.
Yeah, that is the key question coming up. So now that we know these things work, it's, how do you get them out there? Not just to, 300 million Americans, but, nearly 8 billion people worldwide. And, the good thing about the nucleic acid vaccines is they're fast to develop, right? And their efficacy has been, just incredible. The bad thing is we're deploying them at scale for the first time. So the supply chain isn't as sort of robust as more traditional vaccines. And so you are seeing these big crash programs to fund and expand that infrastructure. And I think now that we know these vaccines work, you will see, whether it's what you're seeing in Europe or even more here in the US, people doubling down and tripling down on meeting that supply need.
So some folks are saying, okay, for emergency use in December, that is great, but we are going into a long winter. 200,000 new cases a day. The CDC advising people not to travel on Thanksgiving. Here in California, I have a 10 o'clock curfew. I mean, are these vaccines going to be available too late to people like me? Yeah, no,
I think I think that is exactly the right thing for us to be talking about. I think one of the things, Dr. Birx actually mentioned at the coronavirus press conference yesterday was starting in areas where prevalence is lower, places like California, can we start doing surveillance testing? She called them sentinel populations, where you're testing people without symptoms weekly, whether that's in schools, in nursing homes, workplaces. How do we start looking for the virus even when someone's not displaying symptoms? And to me, that's the in-between technology between now and the vaccine being widely available, which, Dr. Fauci said widely available in April, and I think where we would have really the whole, nearly the whole population vaccinated would be more like the tail end of next year if we really pushed it. In the interim, we have to deploy that sort of surveillance testing of people without symptoms. I think Bill Gates mentioned it there too as well. That's exactly right.
Now, once the vaccines are ready, you have talked about how, as you say, this mRNA technology is completely new to the vaccine world. But once we do it this time, it means we can do it again more easily next time. How do you see these vaccines actually changing the vaccine creation, development, and production landscape forever?
Yeah, that's the silver lining here, right? I think this is now the new normal. I think our ability to rapidly respond to an emerging infectious disease, in a matter of months is proven now. I think you will see people try these new mRNA vaccines even for things like flu coming up in the future. So we'll have to see. But I think one of the great things here is the toolbox for how to respond to infectious disease has just expanded dramatically. And I hope we actually use this to kind of clean up some of the infectious diseases worldwide, right? Infectious disease, maybe in the developing countries, shows up once every 100 years with a pandemic, but we still have infectious disease creating enormous negative impact worldwide in low and middle income countries. And these tools, hopefully, will also be able to help there post-pandemic.
Now, there are still concerns about the storing of the Pfizer vaccine in these super cold temperatures that most freezers are not capable of. Moderna doesn't have the same problem. But talk to us about your role in your technology and your technology's role in that process from getting from point A to point D.
Yeah, so the way these mRNA vaccines work is you have to have a piece of RNA that gets delivered to the body and gets in your cell, makes a piece of the virus, and then your immune system responds. But the manufacturing challenge is how do you get that RNA? And there's basically two steps. You grow cells in a big tank, almost like a brewery. And inside every cell is a little piece of DNA that has the code for a piece of the virus. You grow it up, you pull the DNA out, and then you put that DNA in the lab, you add some enzymes, and you turn it into RNA. And then the RNA goes into the vaccine. Well, those two steps are the two steps we're working on, both making how you run that brewery more efficient, so you get more DNA per batch. And then secondly, those enzymes that you use to convert the DNA to the RNA, those are usually just used for, like behind me in the lab, by scientists at the bench. We now need tons of this stuff to actually be able to produce billions of doses of the vaccine. That's more than anyone's ever made of these types of enzymes, and that's a new production process. We're working on that as well.
All right, Jason Kelly, fascinating to hear what you're working on, and thank you for that work and helping to scale this process around the world. Ginkgo Bioworks CEO and co-founder, thanks so much for joining us. All right, coming up, how will big tech's relationship with Washington be shaped under a Biden administration? We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. The Obama administration was known for being kind of hands-off when it came to big tech, especially regarding giants like Google. But with antitrust issues and calls for increasing regulation facing Silicon Valley's tech behemoths, one has to think of what the technology innovation environment will be like under a Biden administration. With us now for more, Jennifer Rhee of Bloomberg Intelligence. So Jennifer, obviously under the Trump administration, the DOJ, the FTC have been in hot pursuit of some of these companies. We've got the DOJ antitrust lawsuit against Google. We've got the FTC exploring a big potential lawsuit against Facebook. How will that be impacted by a Biden administration?
You know, Emily, I think that it's just a continuation. I mean, there's a lot of momentum right now in terms of scrutinizing the conduct of these platforms and others, and I think it's just likely going to continue to be an issue and a focus for both the FTC and the DOJ, even once Biden's appointees, take their places in leadership there. I don't really think anything changes. I know there's been speculation that maybe the Biden administration would go easier on Silicon Valley companies because of what happened with Obama, but I think that was now, several years ago, and things have changed. These companies have changed, and there's just too much momentum at this point. And I think that President Biden, as well as some of his spokespeople, have expressed some similar concerns that we've been hearing from other politicians in the House and Senate about the power of these companies and just generally antitrust enforcement in the United States and how it stands right now. So I think that we continue on. Those lawsuits keep going, and possibly others are brought.
Now, the Obama administration, has been described as not just being hands-off, but often cozy with these tech giants. In fact, you had a lot of folks who worked under President Obama came to run the communications arms of some of these technology companies. Do you think Biden will continue that or will take a different approach?
You know, I think take a different approach. I mean, the thing is that investigations have been ongoing at these companies now probably for over a year. And those investigations yield a lot of evidence. There are just massive numbers of documents collected. There are interviews, there are depositions. And, the staffs at the FTC and the Department of Justice, they're going to go where that evidence takes them. And, ultimately at that level, it's really not political, those decisions. So if there is sufficient evidence that these companies have a monopoly position and that they're abusing, acting anti-competitively, engaging in predatory conduct that harms consumers, those lawsuits are going to be brought even if, Biden is considered in some ways a friend to tech or has people in his administration that are aligned with tech. At this point, it's a little bit, the train is kind of out of the station, and I think it keeps going.
So what are you going to be watching in terms of signals, after Inauguration Day, in terms of how this administration is going to lead, the next administration is going to lead on these issues, and will they expand some of this antitrust scrutiny beyond tech?
Well, I think first thing I'll be looking for are who the appointments are, who the new commissioners of the FTC will be and when they take those positions, because right now there's a Republican majority. The two Democrats have very different views on, what the FTC should be doing right now in the antitrust world than those Republicans. And that's going to flip eventually. We don't know when, but it will flip. And then we'll also have a new Assistant Attorney General in charge of antitrust at the DOJ. If those people are moderates, we might see a slight uptick in enforcement. But if those people are more on the progressive side of the Democratic Party, people who have views that are more aligned, let's say, with an Elizabeth Warren, who believes these companies should all be broken up, I think we could see something pretty significant happening. So the first thing will be, who these appointees are, particularly at the FTC, where we've already seen some pretty radical views expressed by the current Democrats and how they would approach merger review and how they would approach going after monopolistic firms. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I'd be looking for is what happens with legislation. We have bills on the table now, both in the House and the Senate, that are meant to make it easier to go after these kinds of companies in court. And we know that the House is working on something, too. So we'll have to see what goes on with that.
All right. Jennifer Rhee, Bloomberg Intelligence, thank you so much for joining us to weigh in. Lots to watch as a new administration takes over. Coming up, Canadian fellow and rival to Shopify, Lightspeed is going full throttle as the pandemic accelerates the digitization of businesses around the world. We're going to hear from the founder and CEO of Lightspeed next. This is Bloomberg. Lightspeed, which provides an all-in-one point-of-sale solution for small and medium businesses, has seen a surge in customers as the company continues to ride the pandemic wave in e-commerce. The Canadian firm debuted on the New York Stock Exchange 2 months ago and has seen stocks soaring at record highs. Joining us now for more, Lightspeed CEO and founder Dax Silva. He's also the latest guest on our Retail Transformed series. Dax, thank you so much for joining us. So talk to us about the trends you're seeing among customers and small businesses right now as the pandemic continues going into the holiday season.
Yeah, as you can, thanks for having me on. As you can imagine, all of these merchants, and we serve retail, but we also serve hospitality. They're lighting up their digital channels. Most of our customers, have physical presences, but it's all the e-commerce, curbside pickup, delivery channels that are a crucial lifeline right now for these businesses, especially during this moment.
Now, you went public in Canada last year, then on the New York Stock Exchange a couple of months ago, and your shares are soaring. But how much do you expect this much activity to continue as life returns to some form of a new normal, knowing that's still quite a ways out, but the vaccine news has led us to believe it could be sooner than we think?
Mm-hmm. We're all about omni-channel. So we've been preaching omni-channel, which means the blending of physical and digital channels. We've been preaching this for 5 years. So we've just seen COVID accelerate adoption of omni-channel systems. we fully expect that that customers that the consumer, the modern consumer, is going to be shopping in physical locations and online, and businesses have to be prepared to offer both experiences. And so what we've seen is that a lot of our customers, pre-pandemic had used, maybe more of the tools for managing their physical operations, but as the pandemic set in, there was a rush to light up the element of Lightspeed that enabled them to transact with their customers on the digital sense. So, and I think that post-pandemic, I think that these businesses are going to have both of these revenue streams.
You compete with some U.S. tech giants like Square and Salesforce. You also compete with your fellow Canadian company, Shopify. I've had the CEO, Tobias Lutka, on the show as well, talking about these similar trends. What sets you apart?
Yeah, so Lightspeed has always been specialized for the complex merchant. So our average retailer hospitality merchant's doing an average of 600,000 in transaction volume per year. And that means that they've got more complexity in their business. So they've got tens or hundreds of thousands of SKUs in a bike shop or a pet toy apparel, or in a restaurant. It's a restaurant that's connected to a resort or a golf course, and so there's more complexity inherent in the business. And these complex businesses are typically served by legacy systems that have all that deep functionality in the cloud, and the cloud is what's really enabling omnichannel. And I think we're the player with the most scale. And so all those complex businesses that need to go omnichannel are getting onto Lightspeed.
So we have about a minute left, Dax. What are you looking ahead to this holiday season? What trends are we going to see?
I think what we're seeing in our customer base is we're seeing a lot of these new business models of e-com and curbside pickup, and all of these new ways of selling being really popular, and how people are going to get through. We're also offering ways for customers to use things like subscriptions and to get gift boxes and so on, from their favorite retailers. So there's some trends of buying local and shopping with local retailers that are, I think, really interesting for our customers.
Okay. Lightspeed CEO and founder Dax Silva, will keep our eye on you. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, coming up, facts, facts, facts. Americans and citizens around the world need facts now more than ever as widespread misinformation about important issues like COVID-19 and election continues to thrive on social media. The president of USA Facts joins us next to talk about the accurate information out there. That is next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Curbing the spread of misinformation and disinformation has been one of the biggest challenges for social media platforms. Facebook said that it's now labeled 167 million posts this year for including information about COVID-19 that was, quote, debunked by its fact checkers. USA Facts, a nonprofit organization founded by Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft, is working to make accurate government data easy for Americans to access and understand. To discuss now, we're joined by USA Facts President Poppy MacDonald. Poppy, thank you so much for joining us. The politics of COVID has divided families around the world, and I'm sure there are going to be many gatherings for those who are gathering over Thanksgiving where this becomes a very lively topic of conversation. There are still many people out there who don't believe the facts or aren't getting the right facts. So what is the data telling you about just how bad this pandemic is?
When we look at the data, first of all, we know that 8 in 10 Americans believe misinformation is a huge problem. So it's not necessarily a surprise that people don't trust the information that we're getting. And that's why USA Facts really serves to be a nonpartisan source for just the data as reported by the government. And we know it's not always easy to get, and that's why USA Facts goes directly to 3,000 counties across the country to get the data, to see what is happening with the spread of COVID. And what we know, unfortunately, is that while it's not equal across the country. Cases are on the rise again, as people know. When you look at September versus October cases, they were generally on the rise across the country, but there were 5 states that were able to buck that trend. So we think it's really important that Americans can go and look at, for my county, where I live, what's happening with cases and make decisions about their own safety. We know that as of November 7th, 100,000 plus cases were being reported across the country every day. This week, unfortunately, that rose to 150,000 new cases being reported daily. So we're watching those numbers closely. While we see skyrocketing cases, the death rate is stabilizing, but it's still, we're losing 1,000 lives a day to COVID, 250,000 so far this year. So certainly something that we want people to continue to track the data on and really think about their health and safety.
Right, and we now know there are 200,000 new cases of COVID-19 a day in the United States alone. Talk to us about the misinformation and disinformation problem. You know, Facebook says it has flagged, more than 100 million posts, but is that enough?
That's a great question. We go to Americans every year with our State of the Facts poll to say, are you able to access trusted information? And we found that social media in particular saw a drop off of over 30% of people who said, I used to go to social media as a source for daily information. I'm not anymore. And only about 11% of people say they trust that as a platform. So I think those platforms have a challenge when it comes to their audience feeling like it's a trusted place where they can get the facts. That's why at usafacts.org, we're not for profit. We're nonpartisan, and it's really just about making the people's data, government data, and making that data accessible to Americans so that they have trusted data in which they can make decisions and hopefully advocate for positive outcomes in the country.
You're also looking at some other trends, air travel, retail sales, all of this certainly very interesting as we head into Thanksgiving and Black Friday. The CDC has recommended that people not travel. Maybe that means more people will be at home buying things online. But talk to us about how COVID is impacting all of these other behaviors, and making for a totally unprecedented holiday season.
Absolutely. We know that it's not just about the healthcare impact of COVID, but there's a whole halo of issues that are being impacted around not only our economy, but personal spending, personal income, and things like air travel, how we live our lives. So at usafacts.org, we have a COVID impact and recovery hub where you can go daily, look on your mobile device and understand what are the other impacts of COVID? What does that mean for things like food scarcity, where we still have 11% of Americans who don't have access to a stable source of food. When we look at personal income, it's actually up 4.4% from where we were in January before COVID. While that may not make sense, as we've looked at some of the stimulus efforts that have gone out from the government, that's what's causing that income to go up. And we're starting to see retail sales rebound from where they were in January. But government spending obviously has had a big uptick, and the revenues to support that uptick in spending are certainly going to have an impact as we look at the debt and the deficit as we move forward.
Now, you also have your annual Thanksgiving Fact Feast, looking at what will be the most prominent topics of conversation around the dinner table. I'm sure we have some ideas, but what do you think people are going to be talking about this Thanksgiving, whether they're meeting in person or doing it on Zoom or just talking over the phone?
Yes, we know that Thanksgiving is full of lively conversation and debate. And given the misinformation, there's probably some information that will be brought to the table that may not necessarily be based on truth. So we hope that people will feast on facts at their Thanksgiving table. And our Thanksgiving fact sheet has some of the new topics that have certainly will be hitting the Thanksgiving table this year, including COVID-19 and certainly racial inequality in America. But some of the tried and true topics like immigration, jobs and economy, healthcare. It's all in a very easy to access place at usafacts.org, where we have fact cards that you can quickly flip and hopefully in a polite and helpful way challenge that person across the table to start the debate at the Thanksgiving table based on facts.
All right, arm yourself with the facts now, usafacts.org. Poppy MacDonald, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us very important information in a very digestible way. Thank you. All right. Well, vaccine progress from Pfizer today, filing with the FDA for an emergency use authorization for its COVID-19 vaccine. But a long road remains ahead in putting the pandemic behind us. At the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, Alphabet CFO Ruth Porat warned of the risk of disinformation while highlighting the role of tech in pursuing global recovery.
Disinformation, sadly, is not new, and we've invested meaningfully in both people and machine learning to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to elevate authoritative information. As it relates to, for example, COVID, we were anchored and very tightly partnered with the World Health Organization, and we continue to do that. But I think Mike made a very important point. One of the first things we did at Google is aggregate this quality information around COVID and put up some pretty obvious points like wear a mask, socially distance. And yet there was a campaign going the other way. And unless we have clarity in our public policy statements, it's going to be hard to break through. So we are doing a lot of work around disinformation to try and make sure we're elevating authoritative information. But again, that public policy point, I'll just commend Mike on one very important element related to COVID. One of the things that we were excited about at Google is we partnered with Apple to come up with an app around contact tracing, exposure notification, one of the other very valuable tools to try and slow down the pace of this ghastly disease. Mike was super helpful ensuring that we get this implemented in New York and then expanded to the tri-state area. But exposure notification, contact tracing can't be effective if there's not massive take-up of it, because it's really about what happens as you travel throughout the day. And so again, we need public policy consistency around these statements, and then we can amplify with technology and some of the solutions that we have.
We've seen that coronavirus has shown us just how extraordinary technology companies have been in enabling the global economy to just keep going. Thank God. We're also seeing really stark inequalities in the United States and around the world. So let me start by asking you, what do you think the role and the responsibilities are for the tech sector and for Google in helping to reverse these inequalities?
Oh, you're absolutely correct that what we're seeing as a result of COVID is an acceleration in this digital transformation. And you see it in so many different areas, commerce, education, telehealth. But absolutely, we're very concerned about what we're also seeing, which is a greater spotlight on the cracks in our social system in education, in jobs, healthcare. And as we look at it and have for quite some time, one of the most important points and drivers for us is that you can't have a healthy, durable economy if everyone doesn't have the opportunity to participate. And so years ago, as we were looking at a digital transformation that wasn't going at quite this pace, but the direction of travel was clear, we launched a Grow with Google program, which is a digital skills program for individuals, NGOs, and small and medium-sized businesses. And what we learned pre-COVID, for example, working with small, medium-sized businesses, is as they transitioned to digital skills, they saw an uplift in revenues and profitability. What we saw post-COVID is 1 in 3 small, medium-sized businesses said without digital skills, they would have failed. So what went from being an uplift became a lifeline. And we're redoubling our efforts on digital skills training. But I think very importantly, what we also have learned in this journey is when we began working with individuals, it was very much a one-to-one training program. And over the years, what we concluded is what would be most potent is to work cross-company, cross-industry, and create basically certificates that would enable individuals to have transferable skills. We focused in particular on an IT certificate program. It was one of the fastest growing job categories. Created an IT certificate program. In 8 months, you could earn one of these certificates, and built a consortium of companies, including Walmart, Bank of America, Intel, Hulu, and others, so that once you earn this, it's basically a light degree, and you can go where you find a role. And for us, one of the very important things is each of us has a responsibility to address these issues in society. I think our view is if we come together and work cross-company, and ideally, even through public-private partnerships, we can magnify the impact that we have. So we're very focused on Grow with Google. You're going to continue to see more of our efforts there. It moved from physical space to virtual as a result of COVID.
Alphabet CFO Ruth Porat there at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. You can catch our special program with highlights from the week's discussions all weekend on Bloomberg Television. Coming up, Tesla on a tear. News of its entry into the S&P 500 index next month, sparking a global buying frenzy throughout the electric car sector. We're going to break down the rally next. This is Bloomberg. It's been a big week for electric car stocks. News that Tesla would be added to the benchmark S&P 500 has sparked a record week for other EV companies as well, including NIO, Lordstown, Nikola. It's also supercharged Tesla's own stock, which had its best week in 3 months. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow, who's been plugged into all the moves. Ed, why is the market going so crazy because Tesla's being added to the S&P when it doesn't really change the company's fundamentals?
Yeah, it has really sparked this frenzy for electric vehicle stocks. Come with me into my Bloomberg and look at this chart, and you can kind of see what we're talking about here. Down the bottom, the red line, that's Tesla, but you can see so many other stocks over the last 5 days have done even better than Tesla has. But really what it is this broad change of psychology from investors that the environment for electric vehicles is changing. People are starting to believe more in the story that in the years to come, consumers will switch from their gas-guzzling cars to battery electrics. The S&P 500 inclusion story is also about investors deploying capital because a lot of index-tracked funds and mutual funds are mandated to hold S&P 500 names. They don't currently hold Tesla, and so they're going to have to sell proportions of the names they do own and then buy Tesla stocks. But there are some other strong undercurrents here, largely focused around policy. We're inching closer to a Biden administration. We know that President-elect Joe Biden has some very EV-friendly policies, both for consumers and the manufacturers themselves. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has brought forward their electrification targets by 10 years. And all of these undercurrents are really changing this investor psychology that, broadly speaking, not just focused on Tesla, there is lots of hope and optimism around these companies that are trying to drive us towards an electric future.
So what are the big next milestones that you are watching for Tesla as you look out over the next weeks and months?
Well, I don't want to disappoint you, Emily, but there's like no one big rabbit out of the hat that we're looking for from Elon Musk. He's really changed the narrative. We were so obsessed with Tesla being profitable, and it's now achieved that and, you know, is well on its way to being on the S&P 500. Really, the narrative now is around growth. Tesla has all these projects around the world. They're making the Shanghai plant bigger. They have a new factory being built in Germany, a new factory being built in Austin. And for all the hype around this company, ultimately, they will only deliver maybe 500,000 vehicles this year. This year, Toyota and Volkswagen will deliver almost 10 million each. You know, so Tesla has a long way to go to really making itself mainstream, making electric vehicles mainstream. And to do that, they need to grow their ability to produce cars. There are some exciting things to look forward to. The semi-truck should come at some point over the next 12 months. Perhaps the Cybertruck will start deliveries by the end of 2021. But really, this is about Tesla trying to become a boring car company and less about the sort of volatile, exciting company that we've known it to be for the last 12 months.
Meantime, there was some not so great news for Tesla this week. Consumer Reports found some issues with how Tesla's cars are built, and also Elon Musk came down with what he says is a mild case of COVID.
Right, so, you know, this is same old Tesla issues. The Consumer Reports did a survey, 300,000 people, and found lots of owners had basic trouble, misalignment of panels. One consumer reported human hair being stuck into the paint. Tesla's long been criticized for its build quality, and it's something that they know they have to sort out. As you know, Emily, Tesla does not do traditional advertising, for example. They rely on word of mouth. They rely on existing Tesla owners really hyping up how good their cars are. But these build quality issues will hurt them if they don't fix them. On the COVID side, you know, Elon Musk says that he has recovered fully from a mild or modest or moderate case of COVID. We don't know much more than that. We do know that he was a skeptic of the virality of COVID-19 earlier on this year, but he's been quite vocal on Twitter questioning how the virus is spread, how dangerous it actually is, and the infection rate itself. But we know that if he had it or not, he feels that he's fully recovered.
All right, good to know. Thanks so much. Our Ed Ludlow in San Francisco. Thanks, Ed, for that update. Coming up, Yelp CEO Jeremy Stoppelman talks about how millions of small businesses are grappling with the pandemic. One aspect may surprise you. His comments from my latest at Bloomberg Studio 1.0 airing tonight. A sneak peek next. This is Bloomberg. The pandemic has caused tens of thousands of small businesses to suffer amidst lockdowns and continuing travel restrictions. Nearly nowhere else is this picture more apparent than on the consumer user review site Yelp, as it serves as a kind of barometer for the health of Main Street USA's economy. The person who runs Yelp knows just how serious things are. I sat down with Yelp CEO Jeremy Stoppelman and asked about that moment in March when the pandemic shut down nearly the entire country.
It was a scary moment, I think, obviously for America, for small businesses, and especially for Yelp, because we're a way to find great local businesses. And, the first thing crossing my mind is, are people going to still buy advertising? We certainly took a pretty big hit in advertising dollars as people paused their campaigns. Fortunately, we had functionality that allowed them to set a future date. And so we encourage people to, set a resume date for their advertising months later, perhaps as the pandemic had passed, or at least when the panic would have subsided.
So fast forward to fall, Yelp shares spike 20% on news of the early success of the Pfizer vaccine. And if everything works out, that could mean the economy opens faster. That's good for small businesses. That's good for Yelp. How optimistic are you?
None of us have been through a pandemic before, so we can't know everything. But, I can't say that in the last quarter, things really had come back. Economic activity had picked up. We were seeing people starting to dine at restaurants, obviously, with the better weather, where we weren't quite into winter yet. People were returning to restaurants. Home and local services, as people spent more time at home with the vaccine potentially arriving and starting to get out there. I think, we can finally say, hey, there is light at the end of this tunnel. That's been the scariest thing about the whole crisis is we had hoped that a vaccine would arrive, but actually knowing that one is there and that it's actually 90% effective, I think is very exciting. Certainly for us at Yelp, hopefully for lots of in the minds of small business owners, and the rest of the world is very happy, I think, to hear that news.
Now, you regularly release these economic impact reports, and from what I can tell, by the end of summer, you found that 160,000 businesses had closed on Yelp. Where does that number stand now? What are businesses telling you about how they're doing region to region?
We have seen, lots of businesses reopen that were temporarily closed. I think the number is around 220,000 of the temporarily closed businesses have opened back up again, which is a great sign. And also from a new business standpoint, especially in the restaurant and food sector, we're seeing new business openings at levels that are in line with 2019. So, that's one really inspiring thing, showing kind of the resilience of American entrepreneurship, is that businesses are, new entrepreneurs are still being born in this environment, which is incredible. I think it just shows incredible tenacity and bodes well for the economy as we start thinking about 2021 and beyond.
Now, the pandemic, as you alluded to, has become very, very political. And I'm wondering what your take is on Joe Biden's election. Are you at all concerned that his safety first approach could, mean the economy opens more slowly?
I think we have to be guided by science. We have to take a dispassionate look. We have to take politics out of it and say, we can't really have a great economy if everyone's cowering, from impacts of the pandemic, or hospitals are getting overloaded with cases. So we just have to take a sensible approach. We have to listen to the scientists. If they're telling us that, wearing masks is going to, diminish the impact of the pandemic, then we should all be wearing masks. It's very straightforward. It shouldn't be a political issue. It's very frustrating that it has been. And I think that costs us valuable time, and even more importantly, costs us health and even lives.
It seems like the next stimulus package might be more scaled back. Are you concerned about a divided government, meaning that small businesses aren't going to get the help they need?
I think the Fed chair has been pretty clear that, businesses need support, especially small businesses need support. And I think the initial stimulus package was a positive. And, we've been all waiting and hoping for another one. And I think, we shouldn't just have socialism for big companies where they can borrow endlessly with cheap debt from the, powered by the Fed. We should extend the helping hand to all these great small business owners that are just trying to get by.
My conversation there with Yelp CEO and co-founder Jeremy Stoppelman. You can catch our full discussion on tonight's edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, airing at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time and throughout the weekend right here on Bloomberg Television. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Stay tuned because Wall Street Week is next with my colleague David Weston. You don't want to miss it. Happy Friday, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.